And welcome back to Conservative Arkansas Media. My name is Paul Harrell. Thank you so much for being with us. So, as we've been talking throughout this legislative session, one of the things that we've discussed has to do with criminal justice reform, parole reform here in the state of Arkansas. We've got a few headlines I can show you. We have Arkansas criminal justice reform bill headed to the governor's desk, so there's been progress made there. Another headline, Protect Arkansas Act headed to Governor Sanders' desk. And then another one, Arkansas Prison Reform Bill awaiting governor's signature. So one of the first people that we interviewed in I think our inaugural episode here of these legislative roundups was Senator Ben Gilmore. He is one of the politicians who've been tasked with getting this legislation across the finish line. I reached back out to Senator Ben Gilmore, and he joins us now. Senator Gilmore, thank you so much for coming back on the program. I
Hey,
know
thanks
you
for
have
having me,
been
Paul.
extremely busy, and so thank you for the time.
Hey, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Always great to be with you. Appreciate what you do and helping put out good conservative messaging for Arkansans.
Well, I'm trying, and it's been a fast moving session, and I know we've been trying to make this interview work for a couple of weeks now, and I know you have honestly been, probably maybe the busiest you've ever been as a legislator. This is a huge piece of legislation. What does it do, and how did this process play out?
Absolutely. No, thank you for that question. And it has been a very, very busy session, but I think it's one that Arkansans should be proud of. We have moved the needle greatly in Arkansas for conservatives, and that's a lot of credit due to the current governor, Sarah Sanders. Appreciate her leadership on these issues, and of course, my colleagues in the legislature. Look, the Protect Arkansas Act is a significant piece of legislation, as I've called it repeatedly, a game changer for our state. Right now, under current law, we have offenders that are eligible for parole after serving just a mere 1/6 of their sentence. So we're talking violent offender back on the streets after serving, in some cases, 1/6 or maybe less than in some cases. So this is unacceptable, and we realize this. A lot of credit to the attorney Griffin on this issue as well. He started championing this issue back, a year ago, even longer, and has really led on this because he even said at that time when he first started talking about it that it's unacceptable not only for our victims, not only just for our communities, but also law enforcement. The fact that we make law enforcement go back and catch the same people over and over again is unacceptable. And this bill changes that. This bill supports victims. It stands with our law enforcement. It provides much needed safety in our communities. And how do we do that? We do that by making sure that violent offenders are where they belong, and that's locked away from our communities. And so with that, you're going to see in this bill, you're going to see some of the worst of the worst. They're going to have to spend 100% of their sentence behind bars, and that's where they should be.
I mean, absolutely, that's where they should be. And I was familiar just when following the news, the Democrat arguments in this. They were trying to say that there's nothing out there that shows that making people serve their sentences longer or making people serve more of their sentence reduces crime. And they kept saying there's no studies out there that show that. But I mean, this is something that, in my opinion, feel free to respond to this, Senator Gilmore. It's
Yeah.
common sense. I mean, if there's less criminals on the street, if they're behind bars, then they can't become repeat offenders. And so obviously it's the case that making violent criminals serve more of their sentences does reduce crime on the streets, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Because look, you have to factor in a deterrent effect. So let's just use what I think is probably the best example: capital punishment. Do people still commit murders? Absolutely. Take away capital punishment. Take away any sort of harsh punishment for killing someone. Are you going to have more murders? I would argue yes, you would. And so with that, I think you have to factor in that there's going to be a deterrent effect. Here's an anecdote for that. I had a prosecutor tell me that once this bill had been passed, he was visiting with some inmates in the county jail in his district. And the first question they asked, now these are people who've already been arrested, and are already being adjudicated. And they asked him, hey, please tell me that we're not going to be sentenced under this new bill. That's criminals. That's criminals asking that question because they understand what this means for them. They understand that if they do some serious, heinous crimes, they're going to spend more time in prison. Now, here's the other thing that this bill does that I think is really important to point out. When we talk about we have a high recidivism rate, and we do, where it's about 47% or so in the state, which is just unacceptable. But when you're looking at the current system and people are eligible for release after only serving 1/6 of their sentence, they're going to be eligible for release before they can even finish any sort of programming that takes place in incarceration. So what incentive do we have currently for inmates if, let's just say, they want to better themselves or want to get their life back on track or want to have productive life outside of incarceration? We're giving them no incentive because right now they're going to get out whether they do programming or not. With this bill, we're saying you have to earn your way out. If you want to get out 15% early on an 85% sentence, or 100% sentence that could be reduced to 85% if you do programming, that's an incentive. If you want to get out 50% early, that's an incentive. So we are incenting people to go and do workforce training, to go and do substance abuse counseling in prison, all these different things that already exist, but there's no incentive for our inmates to go and do that. So this bill basically says, look, if you do this crime, you're going to do real hard time, and you're not going to just get released because you want to be released or because you hit some magic date that says you're able to be released. You're going to have to earn your way out. And I think that's common sense. I think that it sends the message of we're not messing around in Arkansas on crime and on criminals.
No doubt. That's exactly what this says. And we've seen this uptick in crime all across the country. Governor Sanders said it best, I think, in her inaugural address. She said there's nothing compassionate about releasing unreformed and unrepentant criminals back on to the streets. So with this new policy, with this new law that is going to be signed by the governor, by the way, when is she going to sign it?
Today at 1:00.
Okay, so as of today, that today is Tuesday. This is right before lunch, and so she's going to be signing it today. Can you tell us, with this increased amount of time prisoners are going to be behind bars, that means that we're going to have more beds, right? More prisons. So tell us about that plan, because I mean we have to keep our streets safe. This is one of the ways that you're going to have to do it. You're going to have to build more prisons or expand existing prisons. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you make a great point, because you can't do policy like this without having the capacity and the space to do it. And so I want to be real clear here with your viewers and your listeners. When we talk about building capacity, you hear the stories of we haven't built capacity in 20 years and whatever. And that's true in the normal sense of how you think about things. But the Attorney General makes a really good point when he talks about this issue. And he says, make no mistake, we've been building capacity. We've just been doing it under the radar and nobody's been paying attention. And what he means by that is we've been slowly pushing state inmates into county jails because we don't have the capacity. So what does that do? That puts a burden on local law enforcement. That puts a burden on the local sheriff. That puts a burden on the local jailers that are in there trying to manage inmates that, quite frankly, they have no business dealing with, because these are some of the worst of the worst. And so where some of these people should be in more intense, secure prisons, they're in our county jails. And there's about 2,300 inmates in county jails. So we've been steadily increasing capacity. So what we're saying under this plan, and certainly this bill is part of that, but the governor announced that she is committed to building 3,000 beds in our state. Now, some of that's going to be, I think all the options are on the table. Some of that's going to be, maximum security jail cells, and some of that's probably going to be lower level, just to help increase the capacity needed with the revocations and offenders who don't need to be in maximum security. But we are finally doing what we should do as a state in building capacity, because I will tell you this, we have an obligation as a state to provide for the public safety of our citizens. And we can't do that if we are not building capacity to house violent offenders. And, our county jails and our sheriffs have done a great job, and credit to them, but it is unfair to them what we've been doing. And again, it costs, in some cases, it costs more money to house them in these local county jails, because there's the transportation costs to and from. Like, there's some counties that are housing prisoners and they've got to be adjudicated in a court that's 4 hours away. So you're taking a deputy to transfer someone. You're taking the cost that it costs to send that deputy, sometimes overnight, wherever it might be. And so the system is just truly broken right now, Paul. And I think that what you're going to see with building additional capacity, what you're going to see with this new sentencing bill, is we're trying to get the ship back on track. That's only a part of it. The other thing that she announced too, and to her credit, I really want to give her a lot of credit on this, because she understands that if we're going to deter crime, we got to be able to have everything in place that means that we can effectively adjudicate crime. And what do I mean by that? I mean the sense that we have to have a crime lab that can function and that can process evidence and get it to our prosecutors and to our law enforcement. And right now, the folks at the crime lab are doing a great job, but I've been through the crime lab about 3 times and toured it just to see what's going on there, to see how bad it is. And let me tell you, it's pretty bad. We are dealing with a building that is in some areas dilapidated. We're dealing with capacity issues in the crime lab, and so there's a commitment to spend money to build a new crime lab so that we can better adjudicate crime. Because right now, you've probably seen some of the headlines over the last, 5 years or so, that the rape kits. So when someone's raped, they collect samples, the whole deal. Won't get into all that, but it goes to the crime lab, and right now they're behind in just processing those. That's unacceptable. Yep. If you're a victim, or if you're the family of a victim, or even if you are someone who is a defendant waiting to be adjudicated, that is unacceptable. So we've got to fix that. And so that is part of this overall, I think, what she called the Safe and Stronger Arkansas plan, which the Protect Arkansas Act is a part of.
Most of my coverage of the Arkansas General Assembly, and I saw on the front page of the Gazette this morning, income tax reduction. That's great. I'm a huge fan of that. Obviously, like all Republicans, I wish it were more. But most of my coverage has been about protecting our kids. And
right.
I've really covered a lot of these social issues, more so than I ever have, because of just how, in my opinion, depraved the left has gotten, and our kids are being affected. I feel like this goes right along with that. This is such a good counterpart to everything else that the legislature has done, because I have seen the headlines in my own area of Northeast Arkansas, as well as across the state, that crime is a serious problem. It is happening more and more. Violent crime is a serious problem. It's happening more and more. And this is, just like it's the responsibility, I believe, of the government to protect our kids from debauchery, we also have to protect not just our kids, but everybody from violent criminals.
Right.
What are your thoughts?
No, look, I couldn't agree more. And that's why I was really excited to work on this issue. And it was a very sobering issue to work on, because when you're talking about, impacting people's lives, this is what government exists to do. Government, as a small government conservative, I don't believe in growing government. I don't believe in government getting out of its lane and dealing with things it has no business dealing with. But when it comes to providing for the public safety of our citizens, that is a core function of what government's there to do. And this bill is at the center of that. And so I was certainly honored to work on that. But, to your point more directly, we have an obligation to protect our children and our minors in our state, to protect the more vulnerable among us. And if we're not doing a good job of that, shame on us. And I think that this legislature has acted in a way that it is quite clear where we stand on these issues of protecting our children from legislation that pushes back on child sex criminals. In this crime bill, we've put the worst of the worst of child sex criminals in the 100% or the 85% category. Why? Because they deserve to be there. They don't deserve to get out early. They don't deserve to get back out and in some cases I've heard stories over the course of this where they get back out and they harass their victims or their families. It's unacceptable. And so this bill pushes back on that, coupled with all of the other issues that we've dealt with to push back on the left, the woke left agenda that is just insane. When I first got elected and we started dealing with some of these issues as it relates to transgenderism or just dealing with pedophiles, I never really thought about it that we would spend a lot of time debating those issues. And it's sad, Paul, that we have to spend so much time debating them because they are real issues that affect Arkansans and they affect our country more at large. And we've got to push back on that. The fact that we have to have bills that say, you know what, if you enter a restroom that's opposite of your gender and there's a minor in there, you should leave. And of course, we get attacked and we get called crazy and we get called out of control and everything else. But the fact that we have to pass legislation like this to protect children is just disturbing to me. But we have to do it. And we have to push back against the leftist agenda. And, my colleagues and friends across the aisle who are very articulate in how they pose their arguments, and I respect them for it. But I'm going to just tell you, they get those issues dead wrong. And the fact that we have to protect kids, like with the Senator Deese's porn legislation, where you have to prove your age before you can enter a porn site, and people freak out and say, "Oh, we shouldn't do that. It's government, being overbearing and overreach and everything else." We ought to be protecting kids from the trash that's on the internet. And, the other thing is there's so many different platforms that kids are being preyed upon,
Yes.
like with social media and other things. We've had to act this legislative session to push back on some of that stuff. So not only are we addressing it with the crime legislation, as we should, but we're doing it basically to get ahead of it before it becomes crimes, if you will, and push back on that. So you've seen this legislature act in a way to protect kids across the board.
It's unprecedented. It's also unprecedented really across, I'm calling them Christian red states. I mean, the LGBT lobby has taken massive losses all across, and I think that's potentially one of the motives for the Christian persecution that happened in Nashville. I'm so glad that you brought this up, and I don't want to take up too much of your time because I know you got to go and got to get to this bill signing. But back a couple of sessions ago, when then at that time Senator Jason Rapert, he spearheaded this Arkansas trigger law that essentially, in the event that Roe versus Wade was overturned, which we thought was going to be impossible at the time, right? I mean, we never thought that would happen. Arkansas's abortion laws go back to the way they were before the Supreme Court, did what they did. At the same time that bill was being run, the legislature in New York State, they were passing a bill making it legal to kill a baby up to 9 months. And I thought to myself, I was so happy then to be in Arkansas because these legislative acts have consequences. They really do. And, the people of New York are saying, no, we want to sacrifice more kids. And then the people of Arkansas are saying, no, we don't. And we're making plans, for essentially a miracle, which then actually happened. And we now know Roe versus Wade was overturned. I feel the same way now that I did then with these bills of protecting our kids. And it's not just Arkansas. It's a lot of other Christian states that are doing this. We are using what little bit of federalism we have left in the tank to push back against what every institution in this country seems to be controlled by the left is pushing and forcing on our kids. And I'll give you the last word, sir.
No, look, Paul, I think you're dead on this. And, I got asked yesterday by a member of the press, there's been a lot of culture war related legislation passed this session. What do you think about that? And I didn't actually know where this journalist was located. Found out after I made my statement that they were in Washington State. And I said, well, it's very easy. What we don't want is we don't want Arkansas to be like Washington, Oregon, New York, California. And I started listing these states. And he's like, well, you should know I'm in Washington State. And I said, well, no offense to you, but I don't want Arkansas to be like your state. And that's why we have to pass this legislation. That's why we have to put guardrails up along the highways to keep the cars from going off. This is why we do this stuff. And so I think that if we are going to see this state be, I think, be a shining light, or talk, Reagan talked about the shining city on the hill. We have to have forward-thinking legislators that say, you know what? Yeah, we may not have these problems right now in Arkansas, but we could. We could. I mean, who would have thought, to your point, we would have seen the overturn of Roe v. Wade with the Dobbs decision? I mean, we've been fighting for 50 years. One of the reasons I got in politics was over the abortion issue. And we've been fighting that issue for over 50 years. Who would have thought? I mean, that's why you can't give up. You can't quit fighting. You can't quit pushing back, because I can tell you one thing, the other side hasn't stopped, and they're constantly moving the goalpost.
Yeah, they certainly are. Senator Ben Gilmore, we really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for doing everything that you're doing, and give my best to your colleagues as well.
We'll do it. Thank you, Paul. Look forward to being on again.
Absolutely. Folks, this is Conservative Arkansas Media. Thank you so much for watching.